We are now talking to Nets daily writer and reporter Chris Milholen. What's going on, Chris?
What's up, guys? Yeah, it's better to be back at home talking to you guys than like really just smashing the back of a Civic. So that definitely helped out.
Well, the last time my sister was in an Uber, she got into a car accident and broke her ankle because he backed up into a telephone pole. Yeah, could you imagine an Uber driver back into a telephone pole?
What city was this in?
New York. It was in, I think it was in Rockaway, if I'm not mistaken. She was going to Queens, and she was.
I'm telling you, man, those Uber drivers, they're wild sometimes, man. Especially when they got a lot of trips too. They'll push the limits.
Maybe maybe they're just talking to you about sports and they lose control of their car. Maybe they're Knicks fans and you pissed them off.
I've gotten plenty of those. They're like, "Oh, why are you leaving this place?" I'm like, "Oh, I work here."
So why don't we get into the Nets? They get swept yesterday. In embarrassing form, and to me, Kyrie Irving really didn't have anything smart to say after the game. He says he wants to help manage the team when we don't even know if he's coming back next year. Now, he says that he wants to be there. He wants to be a Net for life. He also said that with the Celtics. Where do you see Kyrie Irving going in the offseason? Do the Nets offer him that contract, which they waived after the COVID situation?
I think they give him something, right? It doesn't matter on the years or how whether it's going to be a supermax. It's not going to be the supermax. I can tell you that much. I'll be shocked if it's a supermax. Outside of that, I would imagine that they probably pair it up with Kevin Durant. So it'll probably be a 3-4 year deal. And then I'd imagine that the Nets would probably gain some leverage in that situation too and probably make a team option instead of a player option. So I'd imagine that's the same pair. And then I would say the team option will probably go into a year when Kevin Durant's out of the contract, especially since Irving's publicly said multiple times he wants to finish his career there. So obviously when you think about Kevin Durant, for example, at that point when he gets out of his contract, he'll be 36, 37. Then you look at kind of like Kyrie. He's obviously younger. He's only 30 right now. So if you give him a 4-year, he'd be 34. And at that point, a lot of people speculate that Kyrie Irving may be that one guy that retires at 35, 36, just because obviously, he hasn't played 60 games in a season. A lot of people say his head's not completely at basketball. So you have those type of aspects to it too. But, they're definitely going to come to an agreement on a deal. It's not going to be a 1-year deal or a 2-year deal. I can imagine they're going to match it up with Kevin Durant's extension.
Now, do you think they're exclusively just a package deal, like they're going to be in on it together or nothing? Or can you see it where maybe one guy goes and they go after a different superstar player or trade for another guy with whatever limited stuff they have left? Do you think they're attached to the hip or do you see another scenario?
I think they're attached to the hip unless something happens in a regular season, right? Because, if you had to look at, obviously, the roster construction, especially at what they did after the deadline, obviously James Johnson didn't give him good minutes, but he could have really been needed in that Boston Celtics series with size and length. You look across the board, trading one of their best 3-and-D wings in DeAndre Bembry. That was a big miss on what they had when they were matched against the Celtics. You look at other kind of areas too, ball handling. They didn't really have a good ball handler, especially with Goran Dragic not playing a lot of minutes. That could have been Javon Carter, who they also waived, and he signed with Milwaukee too. So it's like, there's going to be a lot of room for improvement on this roster, and they're definitely going to make a lot of big changes. I can imagine that. There might be a trade or two that's going to be surprising, especially because they know too, Kevin Durant, even though he's locked in for the foreseeable future and all that, he's at that age or that age point where he's coming out of his prime. You know what I mean? Like Father Time. Don't get me wrong. This is Kevin Durant. He was shut down in the Celtics series, but in the regular season, he was dominant. So when you add that all up, I really do think that Kyrie and Kevin Durant definitely tied at the hip. But at the same time, with this team, and obviously as we all know, anything can happen with this team. I wouldn't be surprised if one of them does go a year or two down the line.
Steve Nash, was really outcoached by a rookie coach. He hasn't looked good the last 2 years. Even when he took the team to the Eastern Conference Finals, he looked like he was in no man's land last year against Milwaukee. Where do you see them going this offseason? Do they keep Steve Nash or they decide to part ways with him?
I think it depends on who's available and what the coaching pool looks like, right? Because right now there's only 3 head coaching vacancies, and the same names are hovering around the same positions. You got Mike D'Antoni, who's kind of surprising, right? Because obviously he was a Nets assistant on the staff there, and I would imagine that if he maybe came in, Steve Nash would take an assistant job, or there'd be kind of like a little bit of a demotion, but he'd stay on the team. I would see that would be that's probably the worst case scenario for Steve. I think his job's pretty secure. Especially Mark Stein reported it. Steve said himself, hey, I want to come back. You got the superstar stamp approval from Kevin Durant last night. It's not like Kevin Durant's going to say, hey, I don't want him here. But, he got that across. And Kevin also, if you read between the lines and see how he said, he kind of took the question a little bit disrespectfully because, dude, I just got swept in a first-round series. You asked me who the head coach is going to be next year. He had, that type of, attitude to it. But with Steve, he's got so much because in the NBA, there's 3rd-year windows. Like when you enter that 3rd-year window, you're either gone or you're in still, right? And Steve's hit that window, but at the same time, he's a lot of built-in excuses. Like, you could say what he wants about like the coaching side, the adjustments, lack of rotations, experimenting so much throughout this regular season with the players that they had. But at the same time, you can't underline the kind of just like what he's really just dealt with, like from COVID-19 outbreaks, the whole Kyrie Irving saga with the vaccination, Kevin Durant's MCL sprain, and you just go back to the net last year too with those same kind of factors, So no other coach in the NBA would have dealt with that the way that Steve Nash would have. Like, think about it. You think like if you had Mark Jackson in those shoes when Kyrie Irving was going on with the vaccination status, Mark Jackson would have just blew down a couple doors. You know what I mean? Like, it would be pretty rough. So he's got a lot of, and plus you got to remember, like, Steve also played with Sean in Phoenix. There's that connection there, and and at the end of the day, he got really outcoached by a guy that literally was on his staff last year. That's why he got outcoached so bad, because Steve doesn't make that many adjustments. And especially Ime, who's really his defensive coordinator last year, just outschooled him on all avenues.
So we've seen this experiment where they've gotten Kyrie and KD and then try to bring in a lot of veterans, look a lot like what LeBron used to do in Miami, sometimes in Cleveland too. It seems like in the NBA, it only seems to work with LeBron teams. So do you think the Nets at this point are stuck trying to do that again and try to duplicate it? And with this, I guess, underwhelmingness this season for the Nets and even the last 2 years, do you think teams will shy away from doing that across the league?
I think teams will definitely start shying away from it a little bit, but at the same time, luxury cap does go up each year, right? It doesn't go up a lot, but it goes up a couple million. It goes up 10, 15 million next year. I think it's going to be 10, 15. But, it's one of those things where you have to really, if you're going to pair superstars, like if you think about James Harden, Joel Embiid, Kyrie Irving, Kevin Durant, they got to complement each other very, very well. That's the only way it's going to work. And especially with Kyrie and Kevin Durant, two guys that really just need the balls in their hands to just really be effective. It's one of those things that, they've worked well off each other, but at the same time, there's so many ISO ball. At one night you got Kyrie Irving dropping 60, the next night you got Kevin Durant dropping 40. There's never like a nice little collective effort out of both of them where they drop 20 each or 30 each or stuff like that. It's always his night or Durant's night. You know what I mean? So you have that aspect to it. And then, like you said, when you have signed those max contracts, especially like Ben Simmons, for example, he's sucking up a lot of money sitting on the bench. And, once you have that, you got 3 maxes, your depth's not going to be that good. You got to really kind of work with your budget. That's why they had a lot of vets like Dragic, Blake, LaMarcus, and all those guys joined the team late to go ring chasing. But, it's like one of those things that, like, I don't see a lot of teams like kind of going away from it, but at the same time, if you're going to go away from that, you have to have a really good like draft core that you draft and kind of build up through the draft.
You have to like Ben Simmons' outfits, at least. I mean,
the guy looks like a pack of Skittles, man. Like, it's just like it's insane. Like, I'm just like, don't get me wrong, I feel for the dude on the mental side. Like you got all that aspect to it, but the thing is, it's just like, I don't know. The Nets handled that so poorly.
Yes, they did.
They handled it. They couldn't have handled it worse if you really think about it. Because it's like you hear from the start, it's like, okay, he's aiming for a Game 4 return. As long as there's no setback, he wakes up one morning, he's got back soreness, he takes himself out, and then the reports come out about a mental aspect. We asked Nash about it. Nash goes, hey, there's a mental component. So there's like so many different factors. Then you add the grievance thing with the Sixers in the equation. It's players could downplay that as much as they want as that not being a distraction, but it is a distraction.
We are talking to Nets daily writer and reporter Chris Milholen. Chris, Sean Marks, okay, he's been there for a little while. He traded away practically their future for James Harden. It didn't work out with James Harden. This same thing happened with Billy King when he traded away their future for an old Kevin Garnett, an old Paul Pierce, and an old Jet. It didn't work out. It went one series. They beat the Chicago Bulls, and that was it. If this doesn't work out now with this Ben Simmons thing next year, I mean, you have to fire Sean Marks. This is uncalled for. You traded away your future. You had Harris. You had all these different guys. You had all these great young players, and then you just throw them away for a superstar player that obviously doesn't want to be there and can't stay healthy. Does Sean Marks keep his job if they fail next year?
Well, really what it comes down to is like, in a superstar-driven league, especially when you got Kevin Durant as your main superstar, and you go across the league, superstars got a lot to say, and obviously when a guy like James Harden pops up the market, I can imagine Sean Marks went in and see what the value was. But at the same time, it was Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving that pushed the needle on it and made sure the deal was done. They said, hey, we can mortgage our whole entire future until 2027 if you really want. And that's what they did with the first round picks. Then you look at kind of like, you could tell too, because if you looked at how the Nets were run when Marks got there in 2016, 2017, and then all that year of just building up. So you got obviously they went from 20 wins to 40 wins, 42 wins, obviously the D'Angelo Russell era in that time. And then when you get Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, Kenny Atkinson all of a sudden goes gone. You know, he didn't really have a fair chance at all. He didn't get to coach a healthy roster with Kevin Durant or Kyrie Irving on it, well, together as a unit. You know, Steve Nash was brought in. He worked with Kevin Durant worked with Steve in Golden State as a player consultant back in 2017 when they won a championship together. You know, so that's the main impact. So Sean's got to kind of, and really this is like a whole type of, I wouldn't say a memo to like an NBA GMs, but there's a limit where it comes to giving a lot of players power to let the guys that are in those chairs do their job. Because we could see what happens here is, especially Sean, he was very conservative about the Nets' future for years. He's always, I'm not mortgaging my future. I'm not doing this. But at the end of the day, when James Harden pops up in the market, and, you know, James Harden's not going to come at a cheap price at all, especially when he was coming off those Rockets years. You know, he showed up overweight and everything, but he's still going to have high value. But, you know, if Sean Marks, for example, you know, if he can't deliver a championship in these next 2-3 years, you know.
2-3 years? I'd say next year.
That's a stretch, too. If you don't even get it done next year, or even like you're not even good standing next year, if you enter the playoff 7-8, like obviously, like I said before, this team has so many built-in excuses that you could throw around with injuries, COVID, vaccine mandate, if you even want to throw that as an excuse. Like, you know, so yeah, he's definitely, his seat's a little hot. I wouldn't say it's hot, but you know, it's hot.
One of his best picks was Karis LeVert, like I was saying. He's turning into a star. I know he had that heart problem. He trades him. He goes to Indiana. Now he's playing with Cleveland. I mean, you traded all those young pieces away. That was something.
Jared Allen.
Yes.
He's literally on the cusp of being an all-star, one of the best young ring defense. Like, I'm telling you, man, it's poetic. It's really poetic, man.
Oh, my God. It sounds like the Nets. It definitely does.
Yeah. Never a dull day in this seat, I'll tell you that.
I know it isn't.